The SAB I see is one with unlimited potential. A company whose influence and impact reaches beyond our breweries to impact our communities, our country, and our economy. Here's to rising up, you and I, a new SAB, looking forward to what lies ahead. True African leaders dreaming big to create a future with more cheers. In step with our government and partners, with a blueprint to expand our business and transform our economy and grow our country. Here's to investing in and growing our brands and reputation, differentiating and elevating beer in order to create an environment where we will lead and grow the category with an unwavering commitment to championing responsibility. Here's to harnessing the power of technology by leveraging our growing digital platforms to drive revenue and seamless connection between our retailers and consumers, and doing what we do, but better. Here's to putting our money where our dreams are, evolving the business to meet the challenges of the day, and investing to ensure the transformation of our logistics and supply capability in a changing world. Here's to putting our best foot forward for growth like South Africa has never seen before. Cheers to dreaming big, a dream that we will make a reality.
Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Poloko Lotlela from William Ratcliffe, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the annual general meeting of the shareholders of SAB Zenzele Kabili Holdings Limited. With us today, we have the chairman of the board, Mr. Mos Mwasheng, and directors, Mr. Ernest Kwinda, Ms. Itumele Dlamini, Mr. Duncan Pask, and Mr. William Mokhase. The representatives from the company secretary, William Ratcliffe, and the representatives from the auditors, PwC, and representatives from Computershare, the transfer secretaries, are also in attendance. Before we commence with the annual general meeting, we would like to broadcast a short presentation highlighting sections from the AB InBev results presentation.
Today, I will take you through the results of AB InBev's full-year operating highlights and provide you with an update on the progress the company has made in executing on its strategic objectives. Let's start with the operating performance. AB InBev continued momentum of the business and the strength of the beer category across the footprint in both the fourth quarter and the full year 2022. For the full year, AB InBev top-line revenue grew by 11.2%, with volumes increasing by 2.3%, reaching a new all-time high. Revenue per hectolitre increased by 8.6%, accelerating in the second half of the year, driven by revenue management initiatives and continued premiumization. Driven by the consistent execution of our strategy and top-line growth across all operating regions, the reported revenue is now $5.5 billion above the FY19 pre-pandemic levels, with the volumes at 5.8% ahead. EBITDA increased by 7.2% at the upper end of the medium-term growth ambition and 2022 outlook. The underlying AB InBev earnings per share were $3.03, a 5.2% increase compared to last year. As a result of the performance and strong free cash flow generation, gross debt decreased by $8.9 billion in 2022, leading to a net debt to EBITDA ratio of 3.51 times. Following the deleveraging progress, the board has proposed a full-year dividend. AB InBev's diverse geographic footprint provides a unique combination of growth and reliable cash flow generation, positioning it well to deliver superior value creation. In 2022, the company delivered broad-based growth with a top-line increase in all 5 of its regions and volume growth in over 60% of its markets. In South Africa, SAB delivered record high volumes for 2022, growing both top and bottom line by double digits, despite capacity constraints in the fourth quarter. Thank you very much.
Brutal Fruit Spritzer presents The new Lychee Sesh, a perfect sparkling blend of golden demi-sec refreshment. Brutal fruit spritzer. You belong. Not for persons under the age of 18.
Enjoy responsibly, not for persons under the age of 18.
I would like to now invite the chairman of the board, Mr. Mosheng, to bring the formal meetings to commence and commence with the annual general meeting. Mr. Mosheng.
Thanks, Poloko, and welcome to our SAB Zenzele Kabili shareholders. This is the second annual general meeting of SAB Zenzele Kabili Holdings Limited, and we are happy you have chosen to join us. The board of directors of the company has determined that the meeting will be conducted entirely through electronic participation, as this is the most effective way of reaching our national shareholder base, and to limit the cost associated with hosting a live event, which will have a detrimental effect on the amount of money available for dividends. The board will annually review the viability of hosting live events. Virtual meetings are permitted by the JSE, and it is in accordance with the provisions of the Companies Act 71 of 2008 and the Companies Memorandum of Incorporation. The company has retained the service of INS Proprietary Limited to remotely host the AGM on an interactive electronic platform. Computershare, who are the company's transfer secretaries, are appointed to act as scrutineers and will provide the results of voting on the resolutions put to the meeting. Please take note that in terms of Section 63 of the Companies Act, only persons who have been reasonably verified have the right to participate in and vote at this meeting. This extends to persons who are in possession of a valid proxy form, which has been filled in accordance with the notice of annual general meeting, and shareholders who are reflected on the register as of the record date for this meeting, being the 5th of May 2023, or who are in possession of a written letter of representation from their broker. Before we begin with the formalities of the meeting, I'll take you through some essential guidelines for the meeting. A few pointers on how to cast your votes. All shareholders will have received a link to the voting platform to either their phone number or email address, and many have already cast their votes. You can vote or amend your votes at any time during the meeting by logging into the voting platform. We would like to provide an opportunity to all shareholders to be able to ask questions during the meeting, so please use the Q&A button if you would like to pose a question in relation to the information being presented. Once you've responded to all the questions raised with relate to the item presented, you will also be provided with an opportunity to raise your hand. Once you've been acknowledged, you'll be able to pose your questions. I'll begin by asking the company secretary to confirm that there are at least 3 shareholders present in person who are entitled to vote, and that no less than 25% of the total votes of all shareholders entitled to vote are present in person, by proxy, or represented.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can confirm that there is a quorum.
Accordingly, that the quorum is present, I declare the meeting duly constituted. In accordance with the company's OMI, resolutions put to the meeting will be voted on by way of poll. The resolution will be displayed on the screen for your ease of reference. Shareholders will be given the opportunity to ask questions relating to the resolution, which will be answered after the resolution has been presented. The results of all resolutions will be announced via SMS and sent within 24 hours of the close of the meeting. I refer you to the notice of the annual general meeting and ask that we take the notice of the meeting as read. Are there any questions? Thank you. We will now display the resolutions one by one. Please be reminded that we will respond to questions at the end of each resolution. We shall now proceed with the business of the meeting and voting. The company's audited financial information for the year ended 31st December 2022 has been made available online to shareholders in the annual report. The annual financial statement together with the following reports were also made available. Director's report, report of the external auditors, and the reports of the Audit Committee and Social and Ethics Committee. The chairpersons and members of the respective board committees are also present at this meeting today. In addition, the designated auditor from PwC is available to respond to any questions relevant to the audit of the financial statement. I now invite Mr. William Karuiche to provide a brief summary of the financial position of the company as of 31st December 2022. William?
Thank you, Chair, and morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be presenting the financial highlights for the year ended 31st of December 2022. I'll ask that the numbers are put up on screen. Thanks. First up, we have the statement of profit and loss. This is for the year ended 31st of December 2022. First up, we have dividend income, which was just below 43 million. This is the dividend received from AB InBev for the previous financial year ended 31st of December 2021. The fair value gain in the current year, last year it was a loss. In the current year, you have a fair value gain of 312 million. This was driven by the movement in value of the AB InBev shareholding. So Zenzele Kabili owns just over 5 million AB InBev shares, and in the current year that's being reported on up to December 2022, the fair value of the investment held in AB InBev increased by 312 million. Just to give you an idea, I mean, the value per share was around 960 rand in December 2021, and it moved up to just over 1,000 rand as at end of December 2022. So that movement is reflected as that 312 million favorable increase in value. The operating expenses are just over 7.5 million rand. That's expenses incurred for running the operations of Zenzele Kabili for the year being reported on. I will present more detail on the next slide as to the detail and the breakdown of the 7.5 million rand. So taking into account the dividend income, the fair value gain made for the year, less the operating expenses of 7.5 million rand, we're reporting an operating profit of 347 million rand for the year. Next line is the finance income. This is interest income and on bank balances that are held by Zenzele Kabili. That amounted to 711,000 rand for the year. The next big item there was the finance costs. Those finance costs of 373 million rand relates to the preference share liability, which I'll also talk to in a bit of detail when we get to the balance sheet. But that's the interest incurred on the on the preference shares in Zenzele Kabili. After taking into account the operating profit, adding the finance income and less the interest incurred, which is presented as finance cost, that we made a loss before tax of 25 million rand. The next line item is the income tax expense. The income tax of 50 million rand relates mainly to the foreign dividend tax that had to be paid on the dividend of 43 million rand that was received. And then after taking into account the tax, you're left with a loss of just over 40 million rand for the year. We can move on to the next slide. This is just the detail of the operating expenses. You'll recall I said the operating expenses on the previous slide amounted to just over 7.5 million rand. This is now the breakdown. I'll talk to the line items. An important point to raise here, you'll see the trend on most of the line items is that the amounts have increased from the previous year, from 2021 to 2022. Main reason for this is that Kabili commenced operations end of May 2021. So effectively, you can call it from a finance term, almost operated from the 1st of June. So a lot of the expenses in 2021 were for 6-month period, 6 to 7 month period, and in December 2022, which is the current year I'm reporting on, a lot of the expenses were for the full year, which is 12 months. So that drives a lot of the increase in expenses, but I'll talk through the expenses now line by line. The director's remuneration for 2022 increased from 600,000 last year to just over 1.1 million in the current year. That one, the directors' remuneration increased, not because the rates the directors were paid increased, but largely due to the fact that SAB Zenzele Kabili has committees that report into the board. For example, the Audit Committee and the Social and Ethics Committee. So what happened in 2022, and actually I'll start off by saying what happened in 2021. The directors were not remunerated for the services they rendered to those committees. And then in the current year, which we're reporting on, which is 2022, they were then obviously paid for the services that they rendered to Zenzele Kabili for their services to those respective committees. So I'd just like to emphasize that there was no increase in the rates the directors were paid. However, the increase is driven by the fact that the directors were paid for being members and rendering services to the respective committees of the entity. Administration fees, that has almost doubled from last year, and that talks to what I said earlier on, to say that the fees were for 6 to 7 months in 2021. However, in 2022, there was a full year of services that were provided. The auditor's remuneration, that's as approved by the board, and it was just an annual increase. Computer share expenses, that's almost doubled. Once again, that's due to the time factor. Sponsorship fees, same, an increase, mainly due to the time. Professional fees as well, 1.3 million rand, also largely driven by the fact that almost doubled because of the time factor. And then in terms of the other costs of 1.2 million rand, maybe I'll just give you a bit more detail on what those costs entail. Those costs entail costs like JSE cost for Zenzele Kabili being listed on the stock exchange, the cost of hosting the annual general meeting, etc., and the likes. So, and cost of preparing the annual reports that are get presented to the shareholders. That's what makes up the 7.5 million rand operating costs. We can move to the next slide, please. These are the highlights of the statement of financial position as at end of December, which what most of us will still refer to as the balance sheet. The first asset we've got, which is the bulk of the assets, is the 5.2 billion rand. That is the value of the 5.1 million shares that are held by Kabili in AB InBev. You'll see if you compare to the previous year, it was 4.9 and it's gone to 5.2. That's the 300 and odd million increase that I spoke to on the income statement side of things. The other assets are current assets, which are quite minor in the bigger scheme of things. It's just cash and cash equivalents and prepayments. The cash is the cash that Kabili held in the bank as at the end of December 2022. I'm happy to move to the next slide. This is the equity and liabilities portion of the balance sheet or the statement of financial position. Equity is just over 2.2 billion. I'll just talk to the accumulated loss there as well of 795 million. The 795 million is it's an accumulated loss. So this is from inception of Kabili up to end of December 2022. What drives the 795 million is, as you can see, there was about 749 million rand loss in the prior year. And then if you add the loss for the current year of just over 40 million rand to that and deduct the dividends that were paid of around 6 million rand, you'll get to the 795 million rand that's presented on the statement of financial position. The non-current liabilities, you'll see the preference shares, it's referenced to note 6. You will need to look at the 2.69 billion that's showed there as a preference together with the amount that's shown, that's referenced to note 6 below, which is about 265 million rand. If you add those two up, you about 2.9 billion rand. That's basically the value of the preference share liability that's sitting as at end of December in the books of Kabili. And the South African breweries facility is at 12.6 million. This is the facility that SAB advanced to Kabili at inception. And the reason for this facility was to assist and provide cash to Kabili to run the operations of Kabili up until such time as Kabili was able to generate enough cash to fund its own operations. The trade and other payables of 7 million, that is amounts that were not yet paid to the service providers as at end of December, and also included in there is about 5 million rand that's owed to South African breweries, and that 5 million rand was basically the cost that were incurred, actually not incurred, but incurred by Kabili, but were paid for by SAB at the time. Those costs mainly relate up to the period ended 31st of December 2021. And then there's just a small amount of tax payable that's due to SARS as at end of December, and amounts payable to shareholders of just around 9,000 rand. And that makes up the equity and liabilities side of the balance sheet. And then if I may, just talk to the process currently of the, I spoke about the dividends received. If I may just briefly highlight the process of the, how the dividend works in terms of going forward. So we will be aware that AB InBev has declared a dividend. So where we are currently now is that once the funds are received by Zenzele Kabili, the board will go through the process of deliberating and considering how much has been received. And as guided by the prospectus of Zenzele Kabili, normally what will happen is that there will be an amount that will be deducted for operating expenses of Kabili, and then whatever's left over from that will then be split. 75% will go towards the payment of the liability that I've spoken about, the preferential liability, and then 25% of that will then normally be distributed as a dividend. So the board will be deliberating on that once the funds have been received. And also to highlight in terms of the timeline of the process that I've just outlined, the expectation from the board is that this process will be finalized and communication will be done by the end of May. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, William. Are there any questions on the 22 annual report and financial statement which members may wish to raise?
That have been raised in the chat. If anybody would like to ask a question, they should raise their hands now.
We'll now take a few questions from shareholders who have raised their hands. Are there any hands raised?
None that I can see, Mr. Chairman.
There be no questions for the meeting. We'll now move on to the report on matters within the Social and Ethics Committee's mandate, which was included in the company's 2022 annual report. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise from that report? There be no questions. I now move on to the voting of the ordinary and special resolutions as set out in the notice of the meeting. As this meeting is being held completely electronically, shareholders and proxies were able to cast their votes on the online voting platform prior to the meeting. Where a proxy vote has been given to the chairman without voting instructions, I've noted in favor of each resolution. I will now table all the resolutions to be voted on as outlined in the notice of the meeting. For those shareholders who have not already cast their votes, you will need to vote on the online voting platform. Ordinary resolution number 1.
Thank you, Chair. We will present now ordinary resolution number 1.1, which is the re-election of Mr. Mosung Washing as a director. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise relating to this resolution? No questions. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you. There be no questions for resolution number 1.1. Ordinary resolution number 1.2, re-election of Mr. Duncan Pask as a director. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There are no questions.
There be no questions. We'll move on to ordinary resolution number 1.3, confirmation of the appointment of Mr. William Mokhase. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There are no questions.
There be no questions. We're going to go to the reappointment of audit committee members. Ordinary resolution number 2.1, reappointment of Mr. Ernest Quinda as an audit committee member. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There are no questions.
Then we move on to ordinary resolution number 2.2, which is the reappointment of Mr. Moseng Washeng as an audit committee member. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There's no questions.
There be no questions. Ordinary resolution number 2.3, reappointment of Ms. Tumi Lamini as an audit committee member. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There are no questions.
Now we move on to the reappointment of external auditors. Ordinary resolution number 3, reappointment of PwC as independent external auditors. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There's no questions.
We now move on to special resolution number 1, remuneration of non-executive directors. Are there any questions that members may wish to raise?
There are no questions.
All the resolutions for consideration have now been tabled. Voting will remain open for the next 10 minutes until 9:35. I will now allow for questions from the meeting. Please raise your hand on the chat facility if you wish to raise questions while we're waiting for the voting results. It doesn't seem that there are any questions from members. Are there any items that anyone would like to raise before the meeting is closed? Ladies and gentlemen, the voting is now closed. The results will be advised via SMS and will be published on SENS as soon as all votes have been collated. That concludes the business of the annual general meeting of SAB Zenzele Kabili Holdings Limited, and I thank you for your attendance. Thank you very much.